Hey guys, I'm Reagan. I'm one of the co-founders at Vaer Watches. Today I'm going to be providing an in-depth review of our brand new A12 Dirty Dozen. Really excited to share a lot of, nitty-gritty details of this new watch, and hopefully you guys find this interesting. So let's jump right in. So the first thing I should mention regarding the A12 Dirty Dozen is that it's actually a V2 version. It's the second time we've attempted to build this watch, and I have actually the V1 version on my wrist. And like a lot of things, practice makes perfect. And although we're incredibly excited, incredibly proud of the final result of the V1 version of the A12, and it was incredibly popular. I think it sold out within a couple of weeks. We're even more excited naturally with this new version, and I'm going to break down some of those reasons, some of those things that differentiate the two, but you should be aware of that. So the detailed history of the Dirty Dozen and why it's called the Dirty Dozen and all of that, this probably requires a secondary in-depth video on the history of this watch and all of that, but the summary version of that for this video, which I'll try and keep as short as possible, is that the Dirty Dozen is a reference to a collection of 12 watches that were commissioned by the British military. I believe the original commission was in 1939, so it was kind of in coordination with declaring war on Germany for World War II. And while there was a long tradition of watchmaking in the UK, because this was going to be a watch that was widely distributed to infantrymen throughout the British military, the UK military didn't have the capacity to do that. So they basically needed to outsource, early example of globalized outsourcing in the watch industry, they needed to outsource production to Switzerland, which even at that time was kind of gaining ground, gaining steam as kind of the heart of the global watch industry. And so they did that, and the 12 brands, 11 Swiss, I believe, and one from the UK, were the ones that created these watches. And so the general design spec that generally looks like this, those make up the Dirty Dozen. I don't have notes in front of me, but I'll try my best to recall the 12 brands. Guaranteed, I'm not going to name all 12, but try my best. You have IWC, JLC, Omega, Longines, Eterna, Timur, Vertex, Lemania, Record, Sima, Buren. I can't remember what that's 11. That's pretty good. I don't know what the I'll find the notes on what that 12th one is. It's probably very obvious. But anyways, a bunch of those brands are famous, obviously, and others have kind of fallen by the wayside of history. One interesting kind of note is that one of those brands you probably never heard of, Eterna, doesn't really exist anymore, but it was actually acquired by a Swatch Group many years ago, and Eterna actually kind of evolved into ETA, which makes a lot of the movements for the Swatch Group and a lot of other micro brands. And what's really cool actually about our version with the Vaer A12 Dirty Dozen is that we actually have an ETA and ETA movement. We use the 7001 and this version, and then the original was the 2895 ETA, and that's really cool because it actually there's DNA. We're obviously a young brand. We don't have 80 years of history to our name, but we do kind of have at least the cred of using one of the original manufacturer movements in that sense, if you kind of consider the combination of Eterna turning into ETA. Now, I already mentioned it very briefly in saying, between the two movements, both ETA, but that kind of underlies one of the key component changes between the V1 version of the Dirty Dozen and the V2. And it's really going to depend on your interpretation of what you're looking for in a watch in terms of whether it was a good decision or a bad decision. Regardless, like a lot of the things that we've done with this model, is we think it's more authentic to the original, to the the 1940s military standard issue version of the Dirty Dozen watches, in the sense that the new version is a manual wound, and it's actually or hand wound. It's actually our first hand wound watch that we've released through Vaer. So there's a little bit of a mystery in how it's going to be received, but there are a lot of very reputable brands selling very, very expensive hand-wound watches. So we're optimistic that despite the fact that it doesn't have that automatic feature, that there's going to be a real appeal. Now, obviously, that's going to make the appeal of this trend a little bit more towards collectors and maybe someone who have a developed collection of watches rather than the person looking for that single watch for everyday wear. I can't really personally at this point speak to the hand wound, like integrating that into every day. We only have limited numbers as a production prototype that I'm holding. We've had limited numbers, so I'm not haven't been taking this out in the field surfing every single day with it. I have been wearing it around, and personally, although I am actually myself new to manually wound watches, I actually like it. I think it's kind of fun. One, because it, oftentimes you pick up your watch, throw it on, you're looking at the time, but the winding aspect of it does give you a little bit of time in the day to kind of appreciate it and kind of engage with it. And, particularly when you have it on, one of the Vaer quick release straps, which gives you the opportunity of kind of seeing that movement. It's just really cool. It really connects you to the gears and mechanisms. Of course, there's not that spinning rotor that's emblematic on automatic watches. So the fully decorated movement really shines. And this is a highly decorated movement. It has the heat-treated blue screws. It has, I can't recall exactly how many jewels it has. It probably says on here somewhere. But it really is a beautiful movement. And, it compares, you can look at Blank Pen used a very, very similar version of this movement. I think it was, that watch retailed for $4,000, $5,000. So again, this movement, when you flip it over and show someone, it really comes across not as a military watch, but as really something high grade Swiss. And a Stoa would be another example, and I believe theirs is more expensive than this. But again, those heat treated blue screws, it really does look quite fantastic. So the manual wound thing, again, be forewarned, but I think obviously there's a niche market for it. It is a niche kind of feature, but for one, the collector, so of course maybe look for manual wound, and two, I think most importantly, and why we made that decision, for those looking for, loving those original Dirty Dozen watches, those collector's pieces, and they want one that, is a modern homage that has, the fit and finish of a modern watch, that has that 10 ATM resistance rating. That's actually also a very important note. I mentioned Stoa, I mentioned Blank Pen, I think Vaer also uses this movement. All of those versions are more on the dress watch side, and they're all rated at 5 ATM. This is kind of a unique value proposition, and ours not only is the A12 less expensive than all of those watches using the same movement, it's also rated at 10 ATM, where those are rated at 5. So again, just getting a little bit into the selling mode. That's why we think this one stacks up pretty well. But yeah, again, for those that want a watch that lines up with the authentic everyday functionality that the soldiers used through World War II, they used manual wound watches. All of the original Dirty Dozens were manual, as was the technology at the time, and I think that makes it pretty special. Continuing on with this theme, another major difference, probably the most noticeable difference, and probably the thing that's going to decide for a lot of customers, Vaer fans and everyone else, whether or not they want to pick this piece up, is its sizing. So this, the new A12 is a 36 millimeter case sizing, which is comparable to our popular C3 model, the C3 Tradition, the C3 Korean Field, all of that. This uses the same proportion of a case. There are a few subtle differences on the A12 version, but that's a departure from the V1 version of the A12, which was a 40 millimeter case. I know, I 100% guarantee people are going to be watching this video and they're going to be commenting and saying, I love the watch, but never going to wear a 36 millimeter. Completely understand. We've done a survey. We recently did a survey, and that's a comment that pops up. And I get that. I completely get that. The thing that you should know or to consider is that men's wrists weren't particularly so much smaller, back in the 1930s and 40s. They were pretty much the same size as they are today. And there were men, in trenches, storming the beaches of Normandy, wearing a watch this size or maybe even smaller. And so, there's nothing emasculating by any means about wearing a small watch. And in fact, like, if you want to have a connection with that era in which men were actually doing really badass stuff, climbing Mount Everest, for example, Edmund Hillary's Rolex was not 48 millimeters, it was tiny. Just keep that in mind. Like, that was the era of watches as true tools and watches of as pretty badass as they ever were, and they were all tiny relative to, you know, modern American standards, I guess you could say. So will we make this in a 40 again? Probably, because, you know, that's a kind of a good generalist size. Will we make this watch in a 46, 48, 52? No, not gonna happen. Just not our taste. So I've kind of mentioned this offhand a bunch of times, but, you know, keep referencing the fact that this V2 version of the Dirty Dozen is more authentic than the V1. And, you know, I kind of speak to some of the reasons why. I mentioned two already, most obviously the manual wound movement. That's, you know, pretty special. The second thing, I already mentioned this, the 36 millimeter sizing versus the 40. Also, as a side note, so I don't know the exact diameter dimensions of all of the Dirty Dozens, the originals. I do know from a Hodinkee article that the Longines was larger than the others. It was 38 millimeter, and for that reason it's kind of popular today. But that kind of leads me to believe that almost all of the others, just looking at photos and whatnot, were 36 or maybe even slightly smaller than that. So that's kind of an interesting reference as well, that the big one at the time was the Longines at 38, but again, all the other 11 were 36. So that's really authentic, is that I wish, you know, Ryan and I would love to have the money laying around to buy a bunch of the Dirty Dozens, and maybe one day we will. Maybe if this launch goes very successfully, we'll buy one or two to compare. But, you know, proportionally, it's totally in line, other than, I guess you could say, with the Longines, which would be a little bit larger than this. But speaking of the others, and maybe I'll try to overlay some imagery of the original designs, because that will be helpful in talking about that. But in terms of positioning, with that smaller sizing, it really helps with the proportion, in my opinion, of the dial. Everything is just a little bit squeezed together. And so when you look, you kind of glance at just the hand proportion, the positioning of the railroad track relative to the hours, the positioning and size of the subdial, to me, they all just look a little bit more dialed in, a little bit more coherent from a design perspective. But we're really, really happy with how this turned out. Otherwise, you know, it's a very simple dial. There's some really nice detailing if you pull the loop out and take a close look. Just like with the original, there's this nice concentric circle texture on the subdial, which I think is a really nice touch. You know, nice raised paint, heavy Lume application. C1, if I'm not mistaken, across, you know, the dial. So it really stands out nicely, but again, it's not glam, it's not showy, it's not like, you know, anything like that, because really the ethos of this watch is utilitarian. Another kind of minor, but in my opinion really important design differentiation or design detail on the new A12 is the crown. The crown is just about the same size as the crown in the original V1 version of the Dirty Dozen, but on a much smaller case. It actually is really prominent and really kind of looks oversized. You can see it, here's actually my everyday watch, the C3 Tradition Black. You know, you can see there's quite a difference in that crown sizing. That's done for two reasons. One, it's more authentic. You know, you can obviously you know, pick up a trend here, you know, leaning into authenticity on this watch. A lot of or almost all of the originals had these big kind of flat crowns, and that made a lot of sense as a manual wound watch. You know, you're taking in war conditions. You know, Europe can get pretty chilly in the winter, particularly, you know, when you're sitting in the mud or marching God knows where. So obviously it makes sense when you are making sure you're on time. You don't want this like finicky little crown that's hard to get at when your fingers are freezing, you're wearing gloves or whatever else. So the original Dirty Dozens all had big crowns relative to their case sizes, and so does this one, which, you know, is just practical as well, especially with the manual wound in current context. You know, you are going to be operating that crown on a daily basis or near daily basis. It does have a 40-hour reserve, I believe. So if you're doing that, you obviously want the crown action to be easy to access and, you know, ergonomic. And I think that with this size crown, it really is. It really hangs over the edge really nicely. The other thing, this is actually a very important point as well, is that, as I mentioned, this is a 10 ATM rated watch, but there's an important differentiation between the Dirty Dozen A12 and other Vaer watches, in that this does not use a screw down crown, which is, you know, one of the Vaer trademarks. All of our watches other than the A12 use the screw down crown, and the reason for that is it helps support our confidence in our guaranteed waterproof warranty. So when we made that decision to create this watch and make it an authentic hand wound version that was really much in line with the models of World War II, the possibility of maintaining that screw down crown was an impossibility. And the reason for that, and it's kind of interesting when you think about it, but the screw down crown is perfect, it's fantastic when you're operating that, those threaded screws occasionally. And by occasionally, I mean, maybe max 100 times a year. On a quartz, you're probably doing it maybe 10 times a year, maybe less. On an automatic, maybe a couple times, you're letting the watch sit. The problem with, if you consider it a problem with the manual watch, is that you're integrating and engaging the crown on a daily basis. And, the research that we had done on that is, well, that's probably a fine thing, first year, second year, third year. We want this watch to be a, decades long kind of investment. And the problem is, with that repetitive engagement of those screw down crowns, like anything, like nuts and bolts or whatever it is, you engage with something, it's going to slowly wear those threads down. And the kind of the measurements on a watch are so minuscule that ultimately what can happen is that the engagement of the threads over time, over a 5-year period or whatever it may be, can actually undercut and destroy water resistance in watches. And was something really interesting to us. And so, the decision was to, we could make a hand wound with a screw down crown, which would be more waterproof, so to speak, in the short term, but over long term, it would risk kind of irreparable damage to the watch. And obviously that kind of was a non-option. What we opted to do and decided to do is basically create a watch that, under all functional conditions, this is just about as waterproof as you can get for this combination of movement. As I mentioned before, the Stowa options, the Vaer options, the Blancpain options, those are all a 5 to 8 ATM, so this is already more waterproof than this. You can swim in this watch, you can take it in the ocean, and all of these types of things. And on top of that, to give you even more confidence, it's still coming with Vaer's guaranteed waterproof warranty. It's just something that, we want to extend and kind of communicate to owners. It's probably unnecessary in many cases, but we just want to say, like, be sensible. It doesn't have the same locking screw down crown on this, so this is probably not your ideal watch for, your upcoming surf trip. 100% we'd recommend buying the much more affordable, much more functional for the daily, ocean use, just one of our quartz watches. That's what these are totally built for. If you're looking for, something truly authentic to a really powerful and rich watch from the past, which is the original Dirty Dozen, then I think there's going to be really a lot to love. And I'm pretty proud to say, and in my opinion, with all of my research, that I think that Ryan and I, we've created what is the most authentic and the most true to form version of the original Dirty Dozen watches ever made. So I think that in itself is pretty darn cool. Getting into kind of some of the final pieces, and this is moving a little bit beyond the Dirty Dozen in its own right. But just talking about things that maybe, again, if you're not familiar with Vaer, this is the first watch you've seen from us, so you don't know the things that come standard. Sapphire crystal, that's every Vaer watch uses sapphire crystal, so super scratch resistant. This one uses a single dome, which, I always like single dome. I have it on my daily watch, which is just the C3 Tradition. I just like the play of it. I just think it makes any given watch look more expensive and more cool. So, the case, really best in class case. Our cases, if you've never seen one up close in person, punch way above their weight. It really, the fit and finishing, the satin brushed, the subtle rounding on the case walls, including the subtle rounding in between the lugs. These are all things that you're really not going to find on really very few watches at all, let alone watches in the sub $1,000 price point. So case, there's really no comparison there when it comes to comparable watches. And the straps too. I think I may have missed this point, but the fact that we sell 36 millimeter watches like these two, the original V1 Dirty Dozen at 40 millimeter, and then our bestseller models, which are still the 40 millimeter C5s. The great thing about it is they're all interchangeable. We always have maintained, we'll always stick with the 20 millimeter lug width, so that makes all of our straps completely interchangeable. Vaer watches, when you go on the site, you're taking a look, they all come with the option. You obviously, the watch is, you know, the core component, and they all come usually standard with a particular waterproof strap, this one being the silicone that comes with the Dirty Dozen. But then you have that kind of chance and kind of cool opportunity as well to choose and customize your second strap. So they all come standard with the second strap, all interchangeable. And, you know, and that's kind of this, the strap will come in a little box like this, alongside your big blue box. And, yeah, and so that's neat. And they all have this, you know, easy, quick release pin. So you can just pop it out, as simple as that. So I'm taking off, you know, dressing down the watch right now, going from the Gator, which this is a really, really cool strap. It's expensive. These are going to retail individually for $200. So these straps alone are as much as, you know, a lot of our watches. But the fin finish is really high, and I think if you are looking for something comparable with, you know, the best of the best in terms of the Swiss made world, you know, the Gator strap is kind of you know, what you're gonna want. But if you're just that person who's looking for you know, everyday functionality, that's what's kind of cool about this, is I think it kind of stands on both sides. Yes, you can pair it with the Gator, you can pair it with one of our Horween leather straps, and it dresses up incredibly well. It's, you know, an incredibly good deal on a high grade Swiss dress watch, really. Or if you are someone who's, you know, more into the kind of the military field stuff and really do spend a lot of time outside, or just want something you don't have to worry about so much and worry about, you know, steam or water or whatever, you're also investing in something that's really, really durable. So, and that's what's kind of cool about it. So you can obviously switch them out as easy as that. That's how our quick release system works. It's super, super simple. Again, almost all the straps are incredibly comfortable, with silicone being the most. And we are offering it on our Vaer single pass strap. This one's old and beat up because this is the one this is the strap that I surf in. And if there's a color combination that doesn't pair on the standard page, you can always add on a third or fourth strap with the Dirty Dozen, or I know a lot of, you know, collectors and whatnot have their own strap collection. Any of your 20mm straps will integrate as well. Also, kind of exciting to mention is we do have a relatively new release, which is our 36mm steel bracelet, and that will also integrate seamlessly with the Dirty Dozen. So that's pretty much all I think there is to talk about today. I didn't really get into the deep specifications and details there in terms of like specific sizing, but I think those are better served going to the product page and looking at that, because there's just so many you know, detailed numbers and whatnot. So feel free if you want to take a look there. You can also obviously ask questions in the comments or reach out to Ryan or myself, and we're happy to answer questions on this watch if you have any ideas or want to know how it compares with another model you're also possibly shopping against, whether that's a Vaer watch or a watch for another brand. Happy to answer those questions. So again, hope you guys like this video. One other very important thing to note, like a lot of our watches, a lot of our mechanical watches, you know, we create these in limited batches. So there's, you know, when they're gone, they're gone. If you're a Vaer customer, you're on our email list, you're aware that, you know, things are often sold out, and I can't predict the future, but I can say that this one I think is going to be pretty popular. So if you're eager, you think this is an awesome watch, and you really want one of the models, I would act sooner rather than later. Obviously, we'll obviously keep trying to bring more in stock, but just the nature of us being a small independent watchmaker, we're always fighting sellouts and trying to kind of keep up with demand when there is a high demand. So just be aware of that. And best way realistically is to follow us either on Instagram or our email list, and that you can kind of stay a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of new releases and, you know, how stock is trending towards sellout and everything else. So alright guys, I think that's just about everything I have to say about the new A12 Dirty Dozen. I hope you enjoyed, and again, feel free to find more information on the watch at our website, vaerwatches.com. See you later.